All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Helen Thomas from the CDFM study group. Welcome. All right, so today's session, we're going to be covering CDFM Module 3, Competency 4, which is the auditing piece. So the whole section in Module 3 is called Accounting and Finance. So you're looking at different chunks. We looked at fiscal law, then we went to finance, and last week we went to accounting, and then today we're looking at auditing. And right off top, what is the difference between auditing and internal control? Because they work kind of hand in hand. But what is the major difference? Anybody want to take a stab at that? What is the major difference between internal control and auditing? Okay, I don't see any hands. So internal control is, okay, go ahead on the phone line.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say auditing, the way I understand it is it's make sure that your internal controls work.
Okay, so auditing is checking your internal control. Okay, I like that.
And
What
I
else?
think internal controls is determining if you are not having I lost my train of thought. The fraud, waste, and abuse, trying to ensure that you're not wasting or abusing any of the resources and funds of the taxpayers' dollars.
Okay.
Setting up controls for that.
Okay. And the simplified way to say that also is internal internal control are the checks and the balances that the agency puts in place to ensure reasonable assurance that everything is being done properly according to standard processes. Auditing is usually an external organization coming in to review your internal control. So that's just a different way of saying it, but understand that they're doing the same thing. It's internal, meaning you're doing it in your organization. Auditing, just like you have the Government Accountability Office, the GAO audits, because they come in and they audit your internal control, you being the executive branch and everything or everyone that falls under the executive branch and who gets a portion of the budget. So remember, as you're studying auditing, do not forget internal control really comes first, because you got to have internal control. And then as you move along in the auditing, it talks about different laws. What is the law that said we had to have those auditable financial statements, like those statements, balance sheet, and so forth we talked about last week? What is the law that said we have to have auditable financial system statement processes? And it comes up frequently in the CDFM on, I don't know if it's the same page because I'm using the 2018 book for this one. The 1990 Chief Financial Officers Act, the CFO Act, and then in 1994, the Government Management Reform Act expanded on the 1990 CFO Act. What it did, it requires all the agencies, 24 agencies, to have auditable financial statement. So it's either the 1990 or the 1994 Financial Management Reform Act. The definition, I have the 2018 book in front of me because my other one, I'm working at home today and I don't have my 2020 book. So let me know, it's page 349, the auditing definition, auditing overview, for those with the 2020 book. Because the material is the same, it just might be on a different page. Anybody on the line with the 2020 book? If not, I'll just read by topic. Okay, we'll move along then. All right, so auditing is the essential element of public accountability and control. A government audit is a comprehensive assessment and report on the financial condition and or the results of the performance of a government entity, program, or related activity. Again, that's that complete external organization coming in to look at your overall assessment of your operation. Give you accountability, control, responsibility, credibility, all of that. So I'm not going to read all of that. The government auditing standards, as mentioned, I think last few sessions, GAO gives us a GAO red book, yellow book, and a green book. On page 10 for this book, but the topic says government auditing standards. When you read that paragraph, you will see which GAO book covers auditing, and that is the GAO yellow book. The generally accepted auditing standards. So generally accepted government auditing standards, the GAGAS, or the yellow book. So that's another name for it. So make sure you highlight that piece. So the GAO standard applies to audits in the government organizations, programs, activities, and so forth. The GAGAS must be followed by GAO, Inspector Generals, Army, pretty much all the individuals that get a portion of the budget has to follow that generally accepted government auditing standards, the GAGAS. There are 4 basic standards in auditing. The general standards are auditor independence, auditor professional judgment, auditor competence, quality control, and assurance. Whenever you have a list, you're going to need to know the differences so that if you get a multiple choice type exam, which what you will see on the CDFM, is you need to be able to say, okay, that's auditor independence. That's auditor competence. So independence, auditor independence is exactly as I stated the definition of auditing. I want someone outside of my organization auditing so that they don't have any buy-in with the company. They're not biased. All of those things are eliminated because they have no particular ties with the organization. So independence of mind, independence of appearance. I don't want someone who is coming in trying to find things wrong. I want them to have that perspective of, okay, let's check your operation, let's identify deficiencies, and let's figure out ways in which we can correct those deficiencies. So independence should be very simple as you think through the process. Auditor independence in mind and appearance. So we don't want any appearance of bias is basically what we're trying to have here. There are some threats though to auditor independence. When you make sure that you have that independence on page 12, if you're in the 2018 book. Threats to auditor independence could be self-interest, that a financial or other interest is inappropriate influence. That means you have an influence over that auditor. So they're probably going to be kind of biased because they know if you evaluate them, if they're your hire or you work in the same chain and they know you can impact their work, their job, that might be a threat to auditor independence. Self-review threat, biases we talked about. Familiarity can be an issue. The threat that aspects of a relationship with management or personnel of an audited entity, such as a close or long relationship, if they're a friend, your friend, they may not give you a good picture of where your organization stands because they like you, your friend, your close friend. Undue influence. If you notice, I'm reading word for word what it says in the book first, and then I'm going to translate it in my own mind into a language that I can remember. But you got to read exactly the way it's stated first, because that is probably the way you're going to see it again. Structural threat, the threat that an audit organization placement within a government entity in combination with the structure of the government entity being audited. That's like saying, okay, well, GAO falls under the executive branch. Probably not a good idea. That's why they work for Congress. Because again, if GAO fell under the executive branch and they have to audit the executive branch, you might have some biases. That's an opportunity for those threats to be realized. So the GAO, External Auditing Organization, falls under Congress for that reason. So those are all the various. Again, whenever you see a list of things, that means you need to know what they are. So if I say which of these are a threat to auditor independence, and I name one off of the list, it should be a click to you like, okay, yeah, I can see that. That's a threat. Or if I say which one on the list is not a threat to auditor independence. So you need to know what the list looks like. All right, the second standard says auditor professional judgment. Professional judgment should be used in planning and performing audits and attestation engagements, and I think we're going to look at that later. So I won't address that word just yet. And in reporting the results. All right, so before I go on, let me read this. Auditors shall observe the following in the conduct of audit planning, reviewing, and reporting. Straightforward information. Is there anyone who is an auditor online today? We're all financial managers, no auditors in the group? Okay. Has anyone done auditing or they do auditing?
I mean, I'm a project manager for the SSAE attestation engagements for, the SOC 1 report. So I have some experience in it.
Okay, so since you brought up attestation engagement, I was going to wait till a few pages back. What is an attestation engagement? When we get to it, I won't have to ask again.
Well, it's an examination over the internal controls over a process that you're asserting to, that management is asserting to, that is put in place and documented. And it's created so that the if it's used by multiple entities, where they can rely upon that SOC 1 report and won't have to retest those controls, that other IPA won't have to retest those controls.
Okay, thank you. So we'll revisit that again. You'll see that word again later, and then I'll clarify some more things for it. But professional judgment, you want the individual to come in, give due process, actually go through. In most instances, before these agencies come into audit, I know I usually deal with DFAS on the finance side, is they'll send you a checklist ahead of time, or you know what checklist they're going to use to judge your internal controls. And so you can prepare yourself to have things in order whenever you're being audited. All right, so auditor independence, auditor professional judgment. The next one is auditor competence. So your auditors have to be trained. Similarly to once you become CDFM certified, you're going to have to complete 80 CET, continuing education credits, every 2 years. You have 80 hours to complete. So the second paragraph on the auditor competence has the same requirement. Auditors must complete 80 hours of continuing professional education and with a minimum of 20 hours. So you don't wait until the second year or do all 80 in the first year and do nothing in the second. You're supposed to do at least 20 in a year, and then you do the additional 60 in the second year, or vice versa. And then the fourth is quality control. So someone has to check the checkers. So that's basically what it's saying, is what you need to know for here is quality control and assurance, meaning that your auditors have to be audited by a peer group. And how often it's done is every 3 years. That's what I pulled out of those two paragraphs. Because again, you want to establish that reasonable assurance that all operations, all processes are being done to the best of your standards, to the best of your ability, so that if something, fraud, waste, abuse, or illegal happens, it's not because you weren't doing what you're supposed to do, just because someone chose to do something illegal. So it says the GAO is reviewed by audit organization of other nations in some instances. That's the second paragraph. So first, audit organization must establish that reasonable assurance, and they must be audited. The audit organization must be audited or reviewed, external peer review every 3 years. So those are the 4 GAO standards. All right, page 16 goes into different types of reviews or audits. You have financial audits, performance audit, and what was mentioned earlier was an attestation engagement. So financial is exactly as it says. You're addressing your financial systems. Because again, garbage in is garbage out. So if you put in the wrong data in, is it spitting out the wrong data? If you put the right data in, is it spitting out the wrong data? You're looking at your financial statement. Performance, you're actually looking at your processes. Reasonable assurance, the concept of significance, audit risk. Are there any risk? Conclusions that can be drawn, recommendations based on your operation. And so a clearer understanding of attestation engagement means that you have a particular process that you want audited. Maybe it's an area that, although you have internal controls in place, you may not be comfortable with how your organization is operating. So an external organization can come in under attestation, and you know they're coming because in most instances you invite them in to look at a particular process to help figure out the best way to do that job and provide recommendation. Nothing there. DoD audit function. So the DoD auditing organization is on the next page. DoD audit functions and standards is the DoD IG, Inspector General. Provide leadership, supervises, provide policy directions, prevention, detection of fraud, and so forth. All of this is based on the GAGAS, the Generally Accepted Government Auditing Standards, or the GAO Yellow Book. There are several auditing organization or auditing groups under the Department of Defense. So you have the DoDIG, which we already listed, DoD Inspector General, the Army auditing, Navy auditing, and Air Force auditing. And if you look at the last paragraph under that section, you will also see the contract auditing agency, or write it there if it's not there, because I think it comes up later, like a couple of pages later, but you may want to write it here also. Army auditing, Army contract, let's see, DCAA, Defense Contract Auditing Agency. DCAA. And if you remember when we talked about this CG in the study guide, I told you CG does not stand for Commanding General. That last paragraph on that page under DoD Internal Auditing Audit Organization tells you the GAO is headed by the Comptroller General, who receives a 15-year appointment. And so that is, if you wanted to see it in writing, that the Comptroller General is the individual in charge of the GAO. I think I mentioned that last week, but now you can see it in writing. So that's the CG. And they do 15-year appointment. They're appointed to that position. So DoDIG, Army, Navy, Air Force auditing. And then if you flip about 2 pages where it says types of audit, on that last, before I go into the types, the last one, the Defense Contract Audit Agency is another audit organization. So really it's 5 of them. So that's why I told you to add it to that other page. On page 22 in this particular study guide, table 341, it gives you the type, the description, and it tells you which standard is used. And you will see the 3 types of audit. Financial audits are expected to determine whether the entity has financial information that is presented. Performance audit, again, we want to make sure our processes are effective in compliance with policies and regulations. And attestation engagements. Auditors issue an opinion as the result of an examination, a conclusion as the result of a review, and a report as the result of an agreed upon procedure. It's agreed upon because you know, as the agency or organization, what they're coming in to do, versus a regular audit. The other audits, the financial audit and performance audit, they probably won't tell you they're coming, or they give you a timeline, because you're supposed to always be ready for audits. Any questions so far on the types? Okay, I don't see any hands. Thank you. Auditors on the next page is basically tell you non-audit services. There are some services they can provide. Auditors may perform services other than audits, and they give you 3 examples. Help you to develop methods and approaches to evaluate or apply a new program, forecast potential program outcome, or perform investigative work. So depending on what you need, the auditors are often there to help you. Again, it's not a, hey, got you type of scenario. It shouldn't be where they find something wrong. It should be there to help you along the way, to give you that reasonable assurance. So the auditing goes through various phases on the next 2 pages. Plan, you got to put the plan in place, develop your objectives, your standards, the scope, because you can't look at everything, the terminology, the methodology, how you're going to do it. Then you actually do the review and you provide the report. So what you're going to need to know for each one of these is what's happening at each phase or stage. So the audit planning phase is exactly what it says. Determine the objectives, the scope, how you're going to do it, who's going to do it, who's trained to do it. Because I don't know for you, if you've ever been audited by someone who have no clue on what they're looking at. And that is so painful. It's like, how can you gig me on something and you don't even know what right's supposed to look like? So also getting the right personnel to do the audit. Then in the review stage, the next page, that's when you start gathering, you're actually doing the evaluation, you're gathering the evidence, the appropriate, what quality, the quantity with the scope and everything that's already established. You're going to determine relevance, validity, reliability. And all of this is documented in that last paragraph in the audit documentation. It used to be called working papers. And if I'm pointing something out and you don't see it in front of you, please let me know. You can interject at any time. Then once the review is completed, the 3rd phase is audit reports. The reporting phase, that's when the auditor is giving their results of what they found. So on that particular page in the audit report, in the study group, you have different types of opinion, and you need to know what those are. Opinion can be unmodified, modified with an exception, disclaimer, adverse. So unmodified is the best. That's what you want on the audit report. So The reason I asked earlier if anyone has actually worked auditing is I don't want you to go down that rabbit hole like a normal audit will go. For this purposes, it's just, again, that overall understanding of what an audit is, what the phases are of an audit, and what's happening at each. All righty, can y'all still hear me? I think we all got, at least I did, got bumped off. All right, so I don't know, what's the last thing y'all heard was the auditing report, unmodified being the best, modified, disclaimer, and adverse. That is the order. So the worst being adverse and the best being unmodified.
Miss Helen, would you be able to start recording again?
I think it's recording. Let me see. Record. Yeah, it's showing that it's still recording.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We'll find out. I know, I was like, where'd y'all go? All right. The concept of audit findings. The elements of a traditional classical finding are condition, the circumstances, just telling you when you do the audit, you're supposed to write down the who, what, why, where, when, basically. What caused, what's the cause, why something happened, and then later on, as the auditor opinion will give you recommendation in how to correct those deficiencies. I don't have anything else highlighted there. All right, potential benefit. The reason you do an audit, again, is to find those deficiencies, those risk factors that's not being addressed, and then put measures in place to address them. In some instances, you can gain a benefit from that particular correction of that deficiency. It can either be a monetary benefit or non-monetary. Let's see. They don't go into a list here, but monetary, again, if it's something where you save money because you went through the processes, the performance audit, and determined, hey, instead of 3 people doing this job, you can cut it down to 2. And because of the learning curve, they've been doing it for so long, they'll get better at it and you'll perform more. So you save money. That's a monetary benefit. Non-monetary benefit could be something like morale, right? It enhances the morale of the organization or the personnel. So all your benefits does not have to be tied to money. Operational readiness, safety, improve the safety conditions of the personnel. So I'm listing these because in the event you have to give an example or recognize an example of non-monetary benefit, is make sure the best way to think about it, if it's not tied to the end result of a dollar amount, then it's a non-monetary benefit. Plan, review, report. Now, although they don't have it on here, I would add another step at the back end to say monitoring. Because if you've had audits done, once they give you that recommendation, in most instances, they have to do a follow-up, or they should do a follow-up. Your monitoring piece is doing a follow-up to make sure you corrected the deficiencies. Because nothing worse than auditing the same organization a year, 2 years later, and they have the same exact problems. So plan, review, report. I will add auditing. And don't forget, internal control comes before auditing. So, and I'm pointing that out because depending on some of the questions that people ask me, they're like, what if it says there are 4 phases of an audit? But in the book, it shows 3. Just remember, internal control is a part of auditing because you got to do internal controls first. Then your audit audits the internal control by plan, review, report. And if you have to add a back end to it, you're monitoring or you're making the correction to make sure that those deficiencies were corrected based on guidance. And finally, the other part of the stoplight is on the last page, audit review of internal control. And I think this is the only page where you will catch it on that last paragraph. Your green light is the GAO standard for federal government internal controls, the GAO Green Book. So audit review of internal controls. They're telling you we're auditing the internal control. Sometimes people separate those for some reason. When evaluating internal control, auditors apply the GAO standards for internal control in the federal government, also called the GAO Green Book. So red book is the GAO appropriations law, appropriations. Yellow book is the generally accepted government auditing standards. And the GAO Green Book is internal control in the federal government. What are your questions as it deals with auditing? Let me look at my notes while we're talking. So that's a pretty short section, but again, there's a lot of information that's in there. A lot of it is you can read through it. So there's no calculations in this section. What are your questions? All righty. All right, I don't have any particular question. Don't forget there are 3 types of audit. What are they? What are the 3 types of audit? We can end on that note.
Financial statement audits, performance audits, and the attestation engagements.
Okay, those are your 3 audits. All right, so the next week, so I probably won't meet the second week because I'll be out of the country. So next week we're gonna do a review of CDFM Module 3 and kind of wrap everything together. It'll be more of me asking questions, you kind of giving me feedback, and then we'll take a few weeks of pause to allow you the opportunity to take the exam for Module 3. Again, do not go into the exam with the attitude, oh, I do this every day. Those are the people that usually are not successful because the way you do it in the office may not match up with the way you're supposed to do it based on the policies, based on the standards in the CDFM, the regulations, the laws, and so forth. We all know that we deviate sometimes in the way how our daily operations work. So make sure that you are studying what's in the book. The study guides are not 100% everything you're going to see on the exam. There will be some curveballs, but if you learn the information that's in the book, understand it, mix up the puzzle, throw a topic over here, and then talk about it, then it doesn't matter what you see on the exam. You'll be able to decipher it enough to select the right response. All right, well, that's all I have for today. Unless anyone have any last minute questions, let me go ahead and stop the recording so I don't forget. Recording stop.